Lister span the cap off the bottle of Glen Fujiyama, Japan's finest malt whiskey, and poured a generous measure into a pint mug. Rimmer lay on his bunk, whistling pleasantly, his hologrammatic eyes a twinkle. Every opportunity he got, he tried to catch Lister's eye and wink at him cheerily. Lister took a gulp of whiskey. "You're loving this, aren't you?"
"Oh, you're not still going on about your impending death, are you? For heaven's sake!"
Fake Scouse accent.
"Change the record! Flip the channel! Death isn't the handicap it once was! For Smeg's sake, cheer up!"
"You are, aren't you? You're loving it."
"Holly, I'd like to send an internal memo. Black border. Begins. To Dave Lister. Condolences on your imminent death."
Rimmer half closed his eyes.
"What's that poem? Ah, yes. Now, weary traveller, rest your head, for just like me, you'll soon be dead."
"You're really sick, you know that."
"Come on!"
Rimmer made the on last 3 full seconds.
"It's all you ever talk about. Frankly, Lister, it's very boring."
"You are. You're loving it."
"You're obsessed."
"You realise when I die, you're going to be on your own?"
"Can't wait."
"I thought you didn't want that. I thought that's what you were bleating on about before."
"No, what got me down before wasn't being on my own. It was the idea that you were doing so much better than me, staying young and being alive. It was all too much to take. Now, me old buckaroo, the caliper's on the other foot."
Lister gave up trying to argue. It was just adding to Rimmer's pleasure. "I remember me grandmother used to say, there's always some good in every situation."
"Absolutely, absolutely," agreed Rimmer. "And looking on the bright side in this particular situation, you are about to do the largest splits you've ever done in your life."
"So I get blown up, right?"
"Bits of you do. What's that thing? I think it's part of your digestive system. The long purpley thing with knobbly bits. You only ever see them hanging in Turkish butcher shops. Well, whatever it is, that fare flies across the navicop chamber. It was like a sort of wobbly boomerang."
"Smeg off."
"Temper?"
"I don't want to die."
"Neither did I."
"But it's not fair. There's so much I haven't done." Lister started to think about all the things he hadn't done. For some reason, one of the first things that came to his mind was the fact that he'd never had a king prawn biryani. Whenever he'd seen it on a menu, he'd always played safe and ordered chicken or lamb. Now he never would have a king prawn biryani. And books. There were so many he'd meant to read, but hadn't found the time. I've never read. Actually, when he thought about it, he realized he'd never read any book. It wasn't that he didn't like literature, it was just that generally he waited for the film to come out. And a family. He'd always assumed one day he'd have a family. A real family, not an adopted one. A real one. And he'd always wanted to spend a lot of time doing the thing you had to do if you wanted to get a family. He hadn't done nearly enough of that. Not nearly enough. A lot, but not nearly enough. He was dimly aware that Rimmer was speaking, and Lister grunted occasionally to give the impression he was listening. But he wasn't. He was remembering his old job back on Earth. His old job parking shopping trolleys at the Sainsbury's megamarket, built on the site of the old Anglican cathedral. One time the manager had caught him asleep in the warehouse. He'd constructed a little bed out of bags of salt, hidden from view behind a wall of canned pilchards. The manager had 2 GCSEs, a company car, and a trainee moustache. He'd lectured Lister for an hour about how, if he applied himself, within 5 years, he could be a manager himself, with a company car, and presumably a trainee moustache. On the other hand, the trainee moustache warned him, if he didn't apply himself, he'd be parking shopping trolleys for the rest of his natural. Lister, who knew he was no genius, also knew for absolute certain he was 147 times smarter than the manager. Nonetheless, he'd found this pep talk extraordinarily disturbing. He knew he didn't want to spend all his life parking shopping trolleys, and equally, he couldn't get excited about becoming stock control manager at Sainsbury's megastore, Hope Street, Liverpool. The manager took him by the lapels and shook him. He told Lister he had to make the grade and become an SCM, or his life would never amount to shit. And now, as he sat there, knowing he'd probably only got a few hours to live, it occurred to him for the first time ever that the pompous goit with the trainee moustache would probably turn out to be right. And that hurt. That really hurt. And that was how he spent most of the evening, tugging at the whiskey bottle, reviewing his crummy life. And it wasn't the mistakes he made that haunted him. It was the mistakes he hadn't got round to making. He flicked through the catalogue of missed opportunity and unfulfilled promise. He thought about the magnificently unlikely string of coincidences which had brought him into being. The Big Bang, the universe, life on Earth, mankind, the zillions to one chance of the particular egg and sperm combination which created him. It had all happened. And what had he done with this incredible good fortune? He treated time like it was urine, and pissed it all away into a big empty pot. But no, it wasn't true. He'd had triumphs, a little voice from the whiskey bottle was telling him. He'd been at the Superdome that night in London when the Jets played the Berlin Bandits in the European Divisional Playoffs, when Jim Bexley-Speed, the greatest player ever to wear the roof attack jersey, had the greatest game of his great career. He'd seen that famous second score when Speed had gone round 9 men, leaving the commentators totally speechless for the first time in history for fully 9 seconds. That was a triumph, just being there. He was alive and there that night. How many men could say that? Then there was that time at the Indiana takeaway in St. John's Precinct, when he tasted his first chamois kebab and become hopelessly and irrevocably hooked on this Indian hors d'oeuvre. True, he dedicated a good deal of the rest of his life searching for another truly perfect chamois kebab. And true, he'd never found one, but at least he'd tasted one. One food of the gods, perfect chamois kebab. How many men could say that? And then there was KK. True, they'd only dated for 5 weeks, and the last week had been a bit sour. But 4 weeks of Christine Kochanski being madly in love with him. Christine Kochanski, who was so beautiful, she could probably have got a job on the perfume counter at Lewis's. And she'd fallen in love with him. For 4 weeks. 4 whole weeks. How many men could say that? Not that many, probably. And that night in the Egbert Arms when he played pool. That night when for some unknown reason everything he tried came off. The goddess of barroom pool looked down from the heavens and blessed his cue. Every shot, tanook, straight in the back of the pocket. They couldn't get him off the table. He was unbeatable. 3.5 hours, 17 consecutive wins. He became a legend. He never played pool again because he knew he wasn't that good. But that night in the Egbert Arms, he became a legend. A legend at the Egbert Arms. How many men could say that? The whiskey bottle clanked emptily against the rim of his glass. He drunk half a bottle of whiskey in 2 hours. How many men could say that? He was drunk. How many men could say that? He fell asleep in the chair. How many men could say that? At 3 a.m, he was woken up by Holly. "Emergency. There's an emergency going on. It's still going on, and it's an emergency." Rimmer sat up in bed, his hologrammatic hair pointing stupidly in every compass direction. "What is it?" "The Navicomp's crashed. It can't cope with the influx of data at light speed. We've got to hook it up to the drive computer and make a bypass." Lister slung his legs over the bunk. "The Navicomp? The Navicomp in the Navicomp chamber?" "If we don't fix it, the ship will blow up in about 15 minutes and 23 seconds. Lister jumped down to the floor. "This is it, then?" Rimmer looked at him. "Don't go." "What do you mean, don't go? You said yourself, I can't avoid it. Let's get it over with. What was I wearing?" "Your leather deerstalker and that grey T-shirt." Lister pulled on his deerstalker with deliberate precision. Then he walked across to the wash basin and lifted the metal towel rail off its support. "Let's go."
"What's that for?"
Lister patted the towel rail against his left palm.
"I'm going out like I came in, screaming and kicking." "You can't whack Death on the head." "If he comes near me, I'll rip his tits off."
Then he was gone. The Navicomp chamber was fogged with acrid smoke from the melted insulating wires, and a thick cable swung from the ceiling, jumping and sparking like a dying electric python. A manic, high-pitched screeching from the wounded navigation computer rose and fell, as around the perimeter of the chamber, monitor screens popped and shattered one by one. Lister, his eyes streaming, fumbled for the bypass unit strapped to the wall, and following Holly's shouted instructions, dragged it across the broken glass and hooked it up to the main terminal. He opened the bypass casing. Inside were 12 switches.
"Start at the one numbered 12,
Holly was yelling,
"and leave a 1-second gap between each switch."
He closed his eyes and rested his finger on the 12th switch. He flicked it down. The pitch of the wailing Navicomp increased by an octave. A green light flickered on beside the number 12. He moved his finger across to the 11th switch. Click. Another octave higher. A green light. The 10th switch. Click. The console monitor above Lister's head exploded and vomited shards of glass into the smoke. Another green light. The switch numbered 9. Another green light. 8. Then 7. And that was halfway. Number 6. Click. A red light.
"Turn it off,"
Holly said.
"Turn it off before—"
Lister flicked it off, waited, and flicked it back on. Green. 5 to go. A maximum of 5 seconds before his purply knobbly thing was destined to fly across the room. Click, click, click. Just 2 left, 2 little switches. Lister wanted it to happen now. The penultimate switch. He didn't want to have to flick on the last one knowing it would be the one to kill him. He wanted to have that slight element of surprise, but he was disappointed. Click. Green light. The pitch of the screeching Navicomp was now so high it was almost beyond his hearing threshold. Hardly a noise, more a feeling. A pointed squeal, a maniac sawing away at the top of his skull. Black smoke thrust its arm down his throat and started to yank out his lungs. Lister stared at the last switch. He rested his finger on it and felt its smoothness. Then he screamed. He screamed and pressed it. And nothing. Just silence. Then a red light that flickered to green, then back to red, and then steady, steady green. Green! There was a huge boom, followed by a second huge boom, and a third. And Lister realized it was his heartbeat. He sucked deeply at the foul, smoke-laden air. It tasted good. And for the second time in 24 hours, he did the touch-up shuffle. His feet rooted to the spot, he swayed from his waist and moved his arms in counter-motion. He was alive. The Red Dwarf tube, Central Line, hissed to a halt, and Lister danced out onto the platform. He had a sudden urge for chocolate, white milk chocolate, which he hadn't had since he was a kid. So he slipped a 50-penny-cent bit into the machine and tugged on the drawer, but the drawer was stuck. For some reason, this filled him with delight. The drawers were always stuck on station platform chocolate machines. Some things don't change. He laughed too much, then jumped on the escalator and leapt 3 steps at a time to catch up with Rimmer. They stood on the escalator. Every advert they passed, Lister sang the advertising jingle.
"I don't know why you're so chirpy."
"I'm alive!"
"But it's going to happen. I saw it happen. It just hasn't happened when we thought it would happen."
"Who cares? The point is, it hasn't happened."
"Correction, it has happened. It just hasn't happened yet."
"Don't let's get into that again."
"Lister, I saw it. I saw you die. It was you. I'm sure it was you."
"What about the photograph? The 2 babies? That hasn't happened yet.
Maybe none of it's going to happen.
It's going to happen.
It's really browning you off, isn't it, that I haven't died yet?
The escalator pushed them off at the top. Lister leapt over the turnstile barrier, and Rimmer walked through it.
No, it's not that. It's just your dunderheaded refusal to accept the pointless cruelty of existence. That's what gets my goat.
Lister shook his head sadly. When they walked into the sleeping quarters, an old man was lying on Lister's bunk. When he smiled, his age lines crinkled like wrapping paper. He raised his robotic left arm. The hand was a metallic prosthetic, but the little finger had been customized, so its top joint was a bottle opener. He used it to flick open a bottle of self-heating sake and took a healthy swig. His white hair was plaited into 3-foot-long locks, and his right eye was missing. In its place was a telephoto lens, which zoomed and clicked and focused in unison with his good eye. And it was quite clear the old man was Lister. He looked towards the door, but didn't appear to see them. The watch on the Future Echo's good right arm emitted a series of squeaks. He turned it off and smiled. Lister made out a curious tattoo on his future self's forearm. It appeared to be burnt into the flesh, some kind of formula. It was fading, but it looked like U equals BIL. Lister was craning closer to read it when the old man spoke.
"So, you're here?"
he said. Lister's voice, but with a slight quaver.
"I can't see you, and I can't hear you, but I know you're here. Rimmer, you're going to say it's impossible."
It is impossible, said Rimmer. I saw you die.
The old man looked more or less in Lister's direction.
"Hello, Dave. This is me. I mean, you. I mean, I am you. I mean, I am you as an old man. I know you're here, because when I was your age, I saw me at my age telling you at your age what I'm about to tell you. And you've got to tell you too when you get to be me."
Well, said Rimmer, thank heavens you still got all your marbles.
"The person you saw die, Rimmer, was Bexley's son."
Rimmer frowned.
Who's Bexley?
"I was always going to call me second son Bexley," said Lister. "After Jim Bexley Speed."
"Dave, it wasn't you that Rimmer saw in the Navicomp chamber. It was Bexley's boy. It was your grandson."
Lister sat heavily into a chair. It was too much to take in. He wasn't going to die in the Navicomp accident. He was going to have a son, who was also going to have a son. And so his son's son would die.
"You have 2 sons,"
the old Lister was saying,
"and 6 grandchildren."
But one of them dies?
"Everyone dies,"
said the old Lister.
"You're born, you die. The bit in between is called life. And you have all those times together still to come. Enjoy."
He smiled. The old man's watch went off again.
"I haven't got much time. Get your camera and go to the medical unit."
What's the medical unit?
Lister fumbled in his locker for his camera. Lister's older self began to grow translucent.
What about me? Rimmer walked up to the bunk. What happens to me?
He can't hear us, Rimmer. He's from the future.
Ah, but if I ask you what happens to me now, you'll remember it, and when you get to be him, you'll be able to tell me.
Brutal!
Lister grabbed the camera from his vacuum storage trunk and raced out.
"Don't waste time. Run!"
the old Lister called after him.
What happens to me, old man? Do I become an officer? Do I ever get a body again? Do we get back to Earth?
The old man took another swig of sake and stared unseeing through Rimmer's imploring face.
"Oh, Rimmer," he said suddenly. "You wanted to know what happened to you?"
Yes, what happened to me?
"Come close."
The old Lister beckoned.
"Come close. Closer."
Rimmer inclined his ear to the old man's mouth.
"You wanted to know your future."
Yes, please,
Rimmer whispered reverently and stood on tiptoe so his ear hovered barely millimeters from the future echo's mouth. The old Lister breathed in deeply, then belched loudly into Rimmer's ear. He was still laughing when he vanished. Rimmer caught up with Lister just outside the medical unit. Lister was hastily fitting an Instafilm into the camera. A jolt rocked the ship, and Lister went crashing against a wall, dropping the film.
"Smeg hell."
He picked it up and fumbled it into the camera.
"Smeg."
It was upside down. Holly flicked up on the wall monitor.
Deceleration achieved. We're slowing down, dudes. We'll be below light speed in 35 seconds precisely.
"What's going to happen now? Are we going to see my funeral or something?"
No, we're decelerating now,
said Holly.
The faster we were going, the more into the future echoes were. But since we've just started slowing down, the future echoes should get nearer to the present.
A baby started crying. Then another baby started crying. Standing in the doorway of the medical unit was another Lister, more or less the same age Lister was now. He was wearing a white surgical gown, and in his arms were two babies wrapped in silver thermal blankets.
"I can't see you and all that guff,"
Lister's future echo said.
"But I'd like you to meet your twin sons. This is Jim, and this is Bexley."
Lister brought them into focus in the viewfinder and rested his finger on the camera trigger.
"Say cheese, boys."
The future echo struck a pose and grinned. The two babies wailed louder than ever. Click! The future echoes slowly faded away. The camera ejected the quick pick, and a photograph of Lister holding two babies in silver blankets slowly coloured into focus. Lister turned and started to walk back to the sleeping quarters. Rimmer followed him.
How are you supposed to get two babies when we don't have a woman on board?
"I don't know,"
Lister grinned.
"but it's going to be a lot of fun finding out."
Captain Yvette Richards ran her fingers through the bristles of her crew cut and craned forward to look at the spectroscope of the sun they were approaching. It was perfect. She let out a Texan yelp.
Woo! We got it!
Flight Coordinator Elaine Schumann leaned over her shoulder and peered at the console.
"It's a supergiant?"
You betcha,
said Richards, and yelped again.
"Time to celebrate,"
said Schumann. Crichton, the service mechanoid, handed round styrofoam cups of dehydrated champagne and topped them up with water. The 8-woman, 2-man crew yelped and cheered and partied, while Crichton handed round more champagne and irradiated caviar niblets, which he'd been saving specially. It had taken the crew of the Nova 5 6 months to find a blue supergiant, a star teetering on the edge of its final phase in the right quadrant of the right galaxy. Another month, and they would have ruined the whole campaign. They certainly felt they had good reason to celebrate. Sipping her champagne, Kirsty Fantozzi, the star demolition engineer, started programming the Nebulon missile. It had to explode at just the right moment to trigger off the reaction in the star's core which would push it into supernova stage. A star in supernova would light up the entire galaxy for over a month, giving off more energy than the Earth's sun could in 10 billion years. It would be a hell of a bang. One undetected bug in Fantozzi's programming could ruin everything. Not only did she have to push the star into supernova, she had to time it so the light from the explosion would reach Earth at exactly the right moment. The right moment was the same moment as the light from the other 127 supergiants, which were also being induced into supernovae, reached Earth. For anyone living on Earth, the result would be mind-fizzlingly spectacular. 128 stars would appear to go supernova simultaneously, burning with such ferocity they would be visible even in daylight. And the 128 supernovae would spell out a message. And this would be the message. Coke adds life. For 5 whole weeks, wherever you were on Earth, the huge tattoo would be branded across the day and night skies. Honeymooners in Hawaii would stand on the peak of Mauna Kea, gazing at sunsets stamped with the slogan. Commuters in London, stuck in traffic jams, would peer through the grey drizzle and gape at the Kola constellation. The few primitive tribes still untouched by civilization in the jungles of South America would look up at the heavens and certainly not think about drinking Pepsi. The cost of this single 3-word ad in star writing across the universe would amount to the entire military budget of the USA for the whole of history. So, ridiculous though it was still a marginally more sensible way of blowing trillions of dollar pounds. And the Coke executives were assured by the advertising executives at Saatchi, and Saatchi it would put an end to the Cola war forever. Guaranteed. Pepsi would be buried. Okay, it wasn't wonderful ecologically speaking. Okay, it involved the destruction of 128 stars which otherwise would have lasted another 25 billion years or so. Okay, when the stars exploded, they would gobble up 3 or 4 planets in each of their solar systems. And okay, the resulting radiation would last long past the lifetime of our own planet. But it sure as hell would sell a lot of cans of a certain fizzy drink. Fantozzi finished the program and fired the Nebulon missile off into the heart of the star. She finished her styrofoam cup of champagne and flicked on her intercom. Let's turn this son of a goit around and go home. The nose cone of the Nova 5 slowly swung around to begin the jag back to Earth. The 7 crew members who were in stasis didn't survive the crash. As the ship bellied onto the cratered surface of the ice-clad moon, it caught the edge of a jagged precipice, which ripped open the port side like a key on a sardine can, and the stasis ease spewed out into the deadly methane atmosphere. Captain Richards, who'd taken the first 3-month watch, along with Schumann and Fantozzi, had been playing solo squash, when Crichton dropped into the leisure suite to inform her politely that the ship's steering system had gone all cockamamie and the computer had gone doolally. She'd raced up to the drive room to find chaos. The computer was reciting 15th century French poetry, and the steering system was on fire.
What in hell is happening?
Étoilette, je te vois,
the computer said soothingly. Crichton sprayed the steering system with a portable extinguisher.
I don't understand what's going on, Miss Yvette.
Schumann? Fantozzi?
Richards barked into the intercom.
Get up here! We're in deep smeg.
It's a complete mystery,
said Crichton.
Que la lune traite à soi. 1 minute he was fine.
Crichton shook his head.
The next he was acting like this.
Richards tore at the panel housing to engage the backup computer.
Nicolette est avec toi. I mean, if I'd known he was going to go mad on us, I wouldn't have bothered cleaning him.
Say what, Crichton?
I mean, what is the point of treating him to a complete spring clean, polishing all his bits and bobs with beeswax, and scrubbing his terminals with soapy water, if he's going to go all peculiar?
You cleaned the computer?
What? Can't you tell? He's absolutely sparkling. Just look inside.
Richards peered into the computer's circuit board casing. Foaming, soapy water bubbled and smoked beneath the gleaming, newly polished innards.
Mamiette le blanc poil,
the computer gurgled, and blew soap bubbles out of its voice simulation unit.
Crichton, did you clean the backup computer too?
Crichton looked away modestly.
Did you, Crichton?
Please, Miss Yvette, I don't want thanks.
Did you?
She grabbed him roughly by his shoulders.
The only thanks I need is knowing that you appreciate a job well done.
His lipless mouth twisted into a plastic grin. Schumann burst into the drive room, wearing a towel, rat tails of wet hair bouncing behind her.
What's happening?
Fantozzi raced past her and up to the fizzling flight console. Her eyes darted over the digital readouts. She typed quickly on the old-fashioned 5-button keyboard.
There's no way in.
She tried again.
We can't get manual. The flight console won't let us in.
Well, it should be working 110%, Crichton said. It's even cleaner than the computers.
The Nova 5 dug a 3.5-mile smoking furrow in the icy surface of the moon, like a giant twisted grin, and finally came to rest in 2 separate pieces at the bottom of a mountain range. The red-hot metal of the hull screamed and hissed, warped and twisted in the cruel suddenness of its icy bath. Gradually, it stopped protesting, and with a sigh, surrendered to its final resting place. Silence. Crichton looked down at his legs. They were 30 feet away, at the other end of the drive room. The Nova 5 tilted like a dry ski slope. He dragged his torso down the incline, over to the body of Yvette Richards. Blood pumped from a gash in her thigh, and her leg was twitching involuntarily. She was breathing. Just. Crichton looked down at the mess of wires that were hanging out of the end of his torso, located one he didn't need very much, yanked it out, and tied it in a tourniquet round the top of her thigh. Richard's eyes blinked open.
Is everyone okay?
Fantozzi was groaning under a pile of debris. Crichton hauled his half-body to the mound of twisted metal and started pulling her out. Both her legs were broken. Crichton made rudimentary splints out of his hip rods and bound them with wires torn from his midriff.
Thanks, Crichton.
Her mouth split into a dry smile, then she passed out. Schumann crawled in from the corridor, her ankle twisted almost backwards and cuts on her face and hands.
Hey, Richards,
she grinned.
Nice landing. Remind me never to lend you my car.
Crichton lugged what was left of himself over to Schumann, and without warning, snapped her twisted ankle back into place. She screamed and punched him in the head.
We've lost the others.
Richards was looking at the security cameras.
And half the ship. We've still got the stores and the medical unit. And since we're all still breathing, we can assume the atmosphere generator is still operational and the crash seal held. I guess Crichton hadn't gotten around to cleaning it yet.
We'd better get you all down to the medical unit,
said Crichton.
Excuse me, Miss Elaine. Would you be so kind as to pass me my legs?
Holly was lost. When he'd finally managed to wrestle Red Dwarf down to below light speed, he'd found a small electric blue moon with a suitable gravity, plunged into its orbit, and performed the 180-degree slingshot maneuver needed to turn the ship around. But now he was lost. The thing about being in deep space is the universe looks exactly the same from wherever you are. It's a sort of gigantic version of the Barbican Center. And although they were now supposed to be on a course heading back for Earth, Holly wasn't totally 100% convinced his calculations were absolutely right on the button correct. There are 2 ways to cope when you're lost. The first way, you get out a map, discover where you are, work out where you want to go, and plot out a route accordingly. The second method was the method Holly was using. Basically, you keep on going, hoping that sooner or later you'll come across a familiar landmark and muddle through from there. So far, nothing had looked very familiar. Occasionally he spotted a constellation he thought they may have passed before, but he couldn't swear to it. And every so often they passed the odd multi-ringed gas giant with a red spot at the pole. But frankly, multi-ringed gas giants with red spots at their poles were 10 a penny. On his way out of the solar system, all those years ago, he'd started to compile what he hoped would be the definitive A to Z of the universe, with galaxies, planets, star systems, street names, and everything. But he'd fallen behind in the last couple of millennia and had lost heart in the whole project. It was the same with his diary. Each year, he began to log the events of the voyage in eloquent detail. But every year, by January the 13th, he'd generally forgotten to keep it up, and the rest of the diary just comprised of a couple of important birthdays: his creator's, his own, Netta Muscat's, and Joe Clump's. And the only reason he included Joe Clump was to remind himself not to send him a card, because he'd written 0G football, it's a funny old game. So until he spotted a star or a planet he recognized, Holly amused himself by devising a system to totally revolutionize music. He decided to decimalize it. Instead of the octave, it became the decative. He invented 2 new notes, H and J. Holly practiced his new scale. Do, re, mi, fa, so, la, wo, bo, ti, do. It sounded good. He tried it in reverse. Do, ti, bo, wo, la, so, fa, mi, re, do. It would be a whole new sound, whole rock. All the instruments would have to be extra large to incorporate the 2 new notes. Triangles with 4 sides, piano keyboards the length of zebra crossings. The only drawback, as far as Holly could see, was that women would have to be banned from playing the cello unless they had birthing stirrups or elected to play at side saddle. This exercise in restructuring the 8-note musical scale helped keep his mind off a number of major perturbations. One of these was that they were running worryingly low of a number of major supplies, which had been consumed by cat-kind during Lister's stay in stasis. Checking the supply list was a bit like opening a bank statement. Sometimes when you're feeling good and things are going well, you can take the news, even though you know it's going to be hideous. Other times, most of the time, that bank statement can stay unopened for weeks. The ranks of figures lurking inside the missive like warped hobgoblins, evil, deranged, waiting to leap out and suck out your life force. Pandora's box in an envelope. That's pretty much how Holly felt about the ship's inventory. The last time he'd mustered enough courage to take a peek, he'd discovered some goose-pimpling shortages. Although they had enough food to last 50,000 years, they'd completely run out of shaken vac. They had little fruit, few green vegetables, very little yeast, and only 1 after-8 mint, which he was sure no one would eat, because they'd all be too polite to take it. So to take his mind off the problem, Holly began singing his first decative composition, Quartet for 9 players in H-sharp minor. He just reached the solo for trombone player with 3 lungs, when the incoming message reached the ship's scanning system. Since Lister realized he couldn't possibly go into stasis on the grounds that the future echoes of himself had told him that he didn't, he decided he wouldn't. And instead, he tried to make the best of a difficult situation. While he waited for the babies to show up, whenever and however that was, he elected to have some fun. He'd found a jet-powered space bike in the docking bay and was overhauling it, with a view to going on a joyride through an asteroid belt. He sat on his bunk methodically cleaning the greasy machine parts which were scattered all over his duvet, with a rag soaked in white spirit, while Rimmer paced up and down the metal-grilled floor of the sleeping quarters.
Mi esporas que ciam vi venos la vetero estos milda,
said the language instructor on the video screen, and left a pause for the translation. Rimmer paced.
Wait a minute. I know this. Hang on, don't tell me.
Without looking up from the jet manifold he was fervently greasing, Lister chimed, I hope when you come, the weather will be clement.
I hope when you come, the weather will be clement,
the woman on the vid-disc concurred.
Don't tell me, I would have got that.
Bon volo directi men al Quencele hotelo,
the recorded instructor prompted.
Ah, yes. This is one from the last time. I remember this.
Lister took the screwdriver out of his mouth. Please, could you direct me to a 5-star hotel?
Wrong, actually. Totally, completely, and utterly, totally wrong.
Please, could you direct me, the instructor said, to a 5-star hotel?
Lister, would you please shut up?
I'm just helping you.
I don't need any help.
Rimmer had decided to put his demise behind him and vowed to make his death as rich and fulfilling as was humanly possible. And so he had taken up again his Esperanto language studies. Although technically Esperanto wasn't an official requirement for promotion, officers were generally expected to be reasonably fluent in the international language.
La mango estis bonega. Diliai koran gratulionin ala Christo.
Rimmer snapped his fingers.
I would like to purchase the orange inflatable beach ball and that small bucket and spade.
The meal was splendid,
the woman translated.
My heartiest congratulations to the chef.
Rimmer squeaked.
Is it?
He asked the vid to pause. You've been studying Esperanto for 8 years, Rimmer. How come you're so hopeless?
Oh, really? And how many books have you read in your entire life? The same number as Champion the Wonder Horse, 0.
I've read books,
lied Lister.
We're not talking about books where the main character is a dog called Ben. Not books with 5 cardboard pages, 3 words a page, and a guarantee on the back which says, this book is waterproof and chewable.
Lister sprayed some WD-40 onto a spark plug. I went to art college.
You?
Yeah.
How did you get into art college?
Usual way.
Normal, usual way you get into art college. Failed all my exams and applied. They snapped me up.
Did you get a degree?
Rimmer's pulse quickened. Please, God, don't let him have a degree. Nah. Dropped out. Wasn't there long.
How long?
Lister looked up and tried to work it out. 97 minutes. I thought it'd be a good skive, but I took one look at the timetable and checked out. It was ridiculous. I had lectures first thing in the middle of the afternoon. 2:30 every day. Who's together by then? You can still taste the toothpaste. He shuddered at the memory and went back to cleaning his bike parts. Rimmer shook his head and restarted the language tape.
La menwo aspectas boega, mi provos la kokidayon.
Ah, now this is one I do know.
Holly's image replaced the woman's on the monitor and smoothly delivered the correct reply. The menu looks excellent. I'll try the chicken.
Holly, as the Esperantinos would say...
Rimmer made the Ionian sign for smeg off with his 2 thumbs.
Bonvolo alcendi la pordiston, lausane estas rano en mia bideo. And I think we all know what that means.
Yes, said Holly. It means, could you send up the hall porter? There appears to be a frog in my bidet.
Does it?
Rimmer was genuinely surprised.
Well, what's that one? Your father was a baboon's rump, and your mother spent most of her life with her pants round her ankles, up against walls with astros.
Look, said Holly, suddenly remembering why he was there. You better come down to the communication suite. We're getting an SOS call. Lister grabbed a cup of tea from the dispensing machine. They collected the cat and caught the express lift down to comm level 3. Aliens, said Rimmer, his eyes gleaming with the possibilities. It's aliens! Rimmer believed passionately in the existence of aliens. He was convinced that one day Red Dwarf would encounter an alien culture, with a technology so far in advance of mankind's, they would be able to provide him with a new body, a new start.
It's aliens!
He repeated.
I know it!
Your explanation for everything slightly odd is aliens, said Lister. You lose your keys, it's aliens. A picture falls off the wall, it's aliens. That time we used up a whole bog roll in a day, you thought that was aliens?
Well, we didn't use it all.
Rimmer shot him his best Rod Serling Twilight Zone look.
Who did?
Aliens used up our bog roll.
Just because they're aliens, it doesn't mean they don't have to visit the smallest room. Only they probably do something weird and alien-esque, like it comes out of the top of their heads or something.
Lister sipped his tea and mulled the concept over. Well, he concluded, I wouldn't like to get stuck behind one in a cinema. A huge screen, 100 meters square, hung over the communication consoles, and 4 speakers, each the size of a fairly roomy Kensington bedsit, throbbed gently as Holly tried to establish contact by repeating a series of standard international distress responses over and over again in a variety of different languages.
It's from an American ship, private charter, called the Nova 5, said Holly tonelessly. They've crash-landed. I'm trying to get them on optical.
Oh, Rimmer sighed with disappointment. So it's not aliens?
No, they're from Earth. I hope they've got a few spare odds and sods on board. We're a bit short on a few supplies.
Lister sipped his tea. Like what?
Cow's milk, said Holly. We ran out of that yonks ago, fresh and dehydrated.
What kind of milk are we using now, then?
Emergency backup supply. We're on the dog's milk.
Lister froze, the styrofoam cup resting on his lips, the tea halfway down his throat. He swallowed.
Dog's milk?
Nothing wrong with dog's milk. Full of goodness, full of vitamins, full of marrowbone jelly. Lasts longer than any other kind of milk, dog's milk.
Why?
No bugger will drink it. Plus, of course, the advantage of dog's milk is, when it's gone off, it tastes exactly the same as when it's fresh.
Lister dropped his cup into a waste chute.
Why didn't you tell me, man?
What? And put you off your tea?
Something's happening!
Rimmer pointed at the comm screen, which fizzled and buzzed with static. Slowly, an image formed. The flat, angular features of a mechanoid face, the head without curves, the mouth without lips.
Oh, thank goodness, bless you.
Crichton clapped his hands together.
We were beginning to despair.
We?
Said the cat, arching his brow.
I am the service mechanoid aboard the Nova 5. We've had a terrible accident. 7 of the crew died on impact. The only survivors are 3 female officers, who were injured but stable.
Female?
The cat looked at Lister.
Is that female, as in soft and squidgy?
I am transmitting medical details.
Digitalized pictures of Richards, Schumann, and Fantozzi flashed up on the screen, followed by reams of medical data. Richards, Yvette, age 33, rank captain, compound fracture left fibula, blood type O. Fantozzi, Kirsty, age 25, rank star demolition engineer, multiple fractures both legs. Blood type A. Schumann Elaine, age 23, rank flight coordinator, severe fractures right ankle, blood type O. The cat's eyes darted across the significant details.
3, all injured and helpless. This is tremendous.
Rimmer turned from the screen and smoothed down his hair.
Tell them,
he said, a new tone of authority in his voice.
Tell them the boys from the Dwarf are on their way, or my name's not Captain A.J. Rimmer, space adventurer.
Oh, thank you, Captain. Bless you. I'll tell them.
Crichton shut down transmission.
Captain?
Lister inclined his head forward and looked up at Rimmer through his eyebrows, as if peering over a pair of imaginary spectacles.
Space adventurer? It's good psychology. What am I supposed to say? Fear not, we're the blokes who used to clean the gunk out of the chicken soup machine. Actually, we know smeg all about space travel, but if you got a blocked nozzle, we're your lads. That's going to have them oozing with confidence, isn't it? Hey, Head, the cat said to Holly. How far are we away?
Not far. 28 hours,
he guessed.
Only 28 hours?
The cat leapt to his feet.
I better start getting ready. I'm first in the shower room. Wah!
He screamed with delight.
I'm so excited! All 6 of my nipples are tingling!
Look, said Lister.
This is a mission of mercy. We're taking an injured crew urgently needed medical supplies. We're not going down the disco on the pull.
Dum 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 dum.
Disco music thundered out of Lister's 8-speakered portable wax blaster, which vibrated and slid across the metal surface of the sleeping quarters table. Dum 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 dum. Lister mimicked the synth timp as he glided rhythmically over to his metal locker and pulled out his underwear drawer. One sock remained. He tutted and grooved across to his dirty laundry basket. Dum 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 dum. He pulled out 2 very hard, very stiff, rather dangerous-looking yellow socks. Holding them at arm's length, he sprayed them liberally with Tiger deodorant, then put them on the table and hit them several times with a small toffee hammer. Dum 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 dum. He moonwalked back to the locker, reverently took out an old brown paper bag, and fished out his lucky scoring underpants. They had at one time been blue. Now they were a yellowy grey with holes in the cheeks, and the elastic hung out of the waistband. He held them in his arms, like he was holding the Turin shroud. These were the underpants he'd happened to be wearing the night he met Susan Warrington. Susan had got him drunk and taken advantage of his tender years on the 9th hole, par 4 dogleg, of Bootle Municipal Golf Course. He'd worn them again the night Alison Bredbury's dad had to be rushed off to hospital with a heart attack, leaving him alone with Alison, the key to the drinks cabinet, and her parents' double bed. From then they'd achieved in his mind a mystic quality. He'd worn them sparingly, not wanting to use up their magic powers. Obviously they'd not always been successful. In fact, a lot of the time they hadn't been successful, and slowly the dreadful thought began to occur to him that they might just be a rather ordinary pair of dog-eared Y-fronts, and not some talismanic, spell-kissed, warlock-woven, sorcery-spun article of enchantment. They were just a pair of knickers. But then he discovered if he wore them backwards, all their magical properties returned. Christine Kochanski. For 4 whole weeks she was madly in love with him. For 4 whole weeks he wore his backward boxers. Not daring to risk an ordinary pair, he'd washed them each night and worn them backward throughout their relationship. Naturally, she'd asked him why. He told her he had 21 pairs of identical briefs, and he always dressed in a hurry. She bought him new pairs and forced him to wear them. Like a fool he did, and soon after their relationship had ended. Dum 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 dum. He slipped on the sacred shorts, backwards and inside out. "No prisoners," he said aloud, and glided over to the ironing board. He lifted the iron off his best green camouflage pants and pulled them on. He felt air on his buttock, and when he checked in the mirror, he found an iron-shaped hole clean through the right cheek. Dum 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 dum. He rifled through his locker, found the colour he was looking for, and sprayed the exposed buttock with green car touch-up paint. He looked in the mirror again. From a distance, you honestly couldn't tell. True, he smelt like a newly painted Cortina, but that would fade in time. He slipped on his favourite London Jets t-shirt and stood back to take in the whole picture. The freshly hammered socks, the cleverly inverted underpants, and the neatly sprayed trousers. Hey, he knew it wasn't perfection, but God, it was close. "Oh, you're not on the pull, eh?" Rimmer stood in the doorway wearing a dashing white officer's uniform, complete with banks of gleaming medals and gold hoops of rank which ran the length of his left arm, which Holly had grudgingly simulated for him. "Look at him," Rimmer thought. "He's really trying. He's wearing all his least smeggy things. That T-shirt with only 2 curry stains on it. He only wears that on special occasions. Those camouflage pants with the fly buttons missing. You're toffed up to the nines," he said out loud. "That's rich, coming from someone who looks like Clive of India." "Oh, it's started." Rimmer dusted some imaginary dust off his gold epaulette. "I knew it would." "What has?" "The put-downs. It's always the same every time we meet women. Put me down to make yourself look good." "Like when?" "Remember those 2 little brunettes from supplies? And I said I'd once worked in the stores, and they were very interested, and asked me exactly what I used to do there. And I said you were a shelf."
Right, exactly.
So? They laughed.
Yes, at me, at my expense. Just don't do it, okay? Don't put me down when we meet them.
How do you want me to act, then? How do you want me to behave?
Just show a little respect. For a start, don't call me Rimmer.
Why not?
Because you always hit the rim at the beginning. Rim, Make it sound like a lavatory disinfectant.
Well, what should I call you?
I don't know. Something a bit more pally. Arnie? Arn, maybe? Something a bit more, I don't know. How about Big Man?
Big man.
How about Chief, then? The Duke? Cap, even? What about Old Iron Balls?
Rimmer could see he wasn't really getting anywhere.
Okay, then.
He tried.
How about the nickname I had at school?
What?
Bonehead.
Impossible. Lister couldn't possibly have known his nickname at school was Bonehead.
No one knew this. Not even his parents. What on Io makes you think my nickname at school was Bonehead?
Well, it had to be, didn't it?
What?
It was a guess.
Well, it was a guess, as it turns out. That was completely way off the fairway and into the long grass. The nickname to which I was referring was Ace.
Your nickname was never Ace. Maybe Ace Hole.
There you go again. Knock, knock, knock. Why can't you build me up instead of always putting me down?
For instance?
Well, I don't know. Perhaps if the chance occurs and it comes up naturally in the course of the conversation, you could possibly drop in a mention of the fact that I'm, well, very brave.
Do what?
Don't go crackers. Just perhaps when my back's turned, you might steer the dialogue round to the fact that I died and, well, I was pretty gosh darn brave about it.
You're pretty gosh darn out of your smegging tree, Rimmer.
Or you could bolster up my sexual past. Why don't you just casually hint that I've had tons of women? Would that break your heart, would it? Would that give you lung cancer to say that?
Rimmer arched threateningly close to Lister's face, his eyes bulging.
Just don't put me down, okay?
Come on, everyone. They're here. They're in orbit. Heavens, there's so much to do.
Crichton rushed down the sloping corridor, pausing only to water a lusciously green plastic pot plant. Things were going very well indeed. The girls had been quiet and really most forlorn of late. Being marooned light years from home with scant hope of rescue had been very trying, to say the least. He'd done his best to keep them entertained, to keep their spirits high, but over the last few weeks he'd felt intuitively that they were losing hope. Even his Friday night concert parties, usually the highlight of the week, had begun to be greeted with growing apathy. Miss Yvette was especially guilty of this. She hadn't particularly enjoyed them from the beginning, and had told him so. The concert parties always began in the same way. After baths and supper, Crichton would clear the decks while the girls played cards or read. At 9 sharp, the lights would be dimmed, and Crichton would tap dance onto a makeshift stage in the engine room, singing "I'm a Yankee Doodle Dandy," juggling 2 cans of beeswax. And then he'd go into his impressions. His best one was of Parker, the mechanoid aboard the Neutron Star, but none of the girls knew him, so it never went down that well. Then there were the magic tricks, or, to put it more accurately, the magic trick. He would lie in a box and saw himself in half. It wasn't much of a trick, because he actually did saw himself in half. And then the evening suffered a slight hiatus, while they waited the 40 minutes it took for Crichton to reconnect his circuitry. Then he'd round the evening off with a selection of hits from The Student Prince. And then they'd play prize bingo. The prize in the prize bingo was always a can of Jiffy Window Clean. Nobody ever wanted a can of Jiffy Window Clean, so Crichton always got it back and was able to use it as the next week's prize. In an odd kind of way, Crichton was grateful for the accident. His life had taken on a new vitality. He was needed. The girls depended on him. His days were full. There was the cooking, the changing of the bandages, the physiotherapy, the concert parties, and, of course, there was the cleaning. Crichton took an almost orgasmic delight in housework. Piles of dirty dishes thrilled him. Mounds of unwashed laundry filled him with rapture. An unmopped floor left him dry-mouthed with lust. He loved cleaning things even more than he loved things being clean, and things being clean sent him into a frenzy of ecstasy. And at night, when everyone was safely tucked in bed, and all the chores were done, and there was absolutely nothing left to clean, then, and only then, he'd sink into his favourite chair, cushions a-plump, and watch Androids. Androids was a soap opera aimed at the large mechanoid audience, who had huge buying power when it came to household goods. Crichton had all 1,974 episodes on disc. He'd seen them all many times, but he still winced when Carstairs was killed in the plane crash. He still wept when Rose left Benson. He still laughed and slapped his metal knee when Hudson won the mechanoid lottery and hired his human master as a servant. And he always cheered when Molly took on the android brothels, put the pimps into prison, and set the prostadroids free. Androids, he told himself, was his one vice. That, and the single chocolate he allowed himself each viewing to conserve supplies. When he watched Androids, he wasn't just a mechanoid, marooned light years from nowhere, with 3 demanding dependents and a never-ending schedule of work. He was somewhere different, somewhere glamorous, somewhere else. He was Hudson, winning the lottery and hiring a human to serve him. He was Jay-Z, swinging the mega quid-buck deals, dining in the best restaurants, living in his vast penthouse atop the Juno Hilton. He was someone else. Crichton rushed down the slope and onto the main service deck where the girls were breakfasting.
"Come on! They're here!"
He clapped his hands. Richards, Schumann, and Fantozzi didn't move. They hadn't moved, in fact, for almost 3 million years. The 3 skeletons sat round the table, in freshly laundered uniforms, and grinned.
"I don't know what's so funny," said Crichton. "They'll be here any moment, and there's so much to do."
He clucked and shook his head.
"Miss Elaine, honestly, you haven't even made an effort. Look at your hair."
He fussed over to the table and took out a hairbrush.
"What a mess you look."
He hummed "Stay Young and Beautiful" and combed her long blonde wig with smooth, gentle strokes. When her hair was just so, he stood back and eyed her critically. He wasn't quite satisfied. He took out a lipstick that matched her uniform and touched up her makeup.
"Dazzling! You could go straight onto the cover of Vogue."
He shuffled down the table.
"Miss Yvette, you haven't touched your soup. It's no wonder you're looking so pasty."
He patted her gingerly on the shoulder. There was a long, slow creaking noise, and the skeleton slumped, face down, into the bowl of tomato soup. Crichton threw up his hands in horror.
"Eat nicely, Miss Yvette. What will that nice Captain Rimmer think if he sees you eating like that?"
He hoisted the skeleton back onto the chair, sprayed her with a squirt of window clean, and gave her head a quick polish.
"Now then, Miss Kirsty."
He waddled over to the remaining skeleton and looked her up and down, the trendy knee-length boots, the chic, deep-red miniskirt, and the peaked velvet cap cocked at a racy angle.
"No,"
he beamed, putting the hairbrush away.
"You look absolutely perfect."
The cat slinked down the docking bay gantry in his gold hand-stitched flight suit, carrying a 2-feet-high, cone-shaped matching space helmet under his arm. He climbed up the boarding steps into Blue Midget, where Lister and Rimmer were sitting in the drive seats waiting for him. He jumped into the cramped cabin, struck a pose like King of the Rocket Men, legs splayed, chest puffed out, hand on one hip, and said,
"Put your shades on, guys. You're looking at a nuclear explosion in Lurex."
He gleamed a smile at them and fluttered his eyes.
"You're looking good,"
said Lister, craning round.
"Looking good? Did I hear the man say, looking only good? Buddy, I'm a plastic surgeon's nightmare. Throw away the scalpel, improvements are impossible." "A spacesuit," said Rimmer, "with cufflinks." "Listen," said the cat, dusting the console seat before arranging himself on it. You've got to guarantee me we don't pass any mirrors. If we do, I'm there for the day.
Lister flicked on the remote link with Holly. Holly appeared on the screen, looking somehow different. Lister scrutinized the image. He couldn't quite work out what it was.
All right then, dudes. Everybody set?
Lister twigged.
Holly, why are you wearing a toupee?
Holly was upset. He spent some considerable time corrupting his digital image to give himself a more full head of hair.
So it's not undetectable then? It doesn't blend in naturally and seamlessly with my own natural hair?
It looks, said Lister,
like you've got a small furry animal nesting on top of your head.
What is wrong with everybody?
Rimmer straightened his cap.
3 million years without a woman and you all go crazy.
He's right, thought Holly. Who am I trying to impress? I'm a computer. How humiliating to have that pointed out to him by a hologram. Out of spite, he instantly simulated a large and painful boil on the back of Rimmer's neck and made it start to throb. Blue Midget, the powerful haulage transporter, originally designed to carry ore and silicates to and from the ship, looked strangely graceful as it flickered between the red and blue lights of the twin sun system above the howling icy green wasteland of the moon that had become the Nova 5's graveyard. Lister peered through the furry dice dangling from the windscreen.
Nice place for a skiing holiday.
Rimmer stared unblinkingly at the tracking monitor.
Nothing yet,
he said helpfully. He slipped his finger down the collar of his shirt, where a large boil was really beginning to hurt. Lister struggled hopelessly with the 12 gear levers. Each provided 5 gears, making it 60 gears in all, and Lister hadn't yet been in the right one throughout the 20-minute jag. The tracking monitor started delivering a series of rapid bleeps.
We've got it!
Rimmer cried.
Lap 27-4, long 17-7.
Lister looked at him like he was speaking Portuguese.
Left a bit and round that glacier.
Oh, right.
Lister landed appallingly in 47th gear. Blue Midget stalled, bounced and rocked, before settling to rest with an exhausted sigh. Lister pushed in the button marked C. The caterpillar tracks telescoped out of their housing, rotated down to the icy emerald surface, and hoisted the transporter 10 feet above the ground.
Hey,
said the cat, impressed.
You really can't drive this thing.
Actually,
said Lister,
I thought that was a cigarette lighter.
The red-hot wiper blades melted green slush from the windscreen as Blue Midget rose and fell over a series of icy dunes. As they reached the peak of the next range, they saw in the hollow below the broken wreck, jutting out of the landscape like a child's discarded toy. The gearbox groaned and rattled as they made their slippery descent down into the crater.
Yahoo!
The cat squealed in falsetto and waved madly out of the portside window.
Ah, come in, come in.
Crichton ushered them in from the airlock.
How lovely to meet you,
he said, and bowed deeply.
Charmita,
said Rimmer, speaking too loudly.
What a delightful craft. Reminds me of my first command.
He turned and hissed to Lister.
Call me Ace.
Lister pretended not to understand and walked off down the spotless new painted white corridor after Crichton, who was chattering banalities about the weather.
Oh, green slush again.
The cat flossed his teeth one last time and followed them. Crichton, used to the strange tilt, walked speedily down the thin corridor, listing at an odd angle. He went through a large pear-shaped hatchway, and they followed him across what must have been the ship's engine room. Even Lister, who knew next to nothing about these things, could tell the Nova 5's technology was far in advance of Red Dwarf's. Taking up 3/4 of the room was the strangest piece of machinery Lister had ever seen. It was like a huge series of merry-go-rounds, stacked one on top of the other, and turned on their sides. Each of these was filled with silver discs, joined by thick gold rods, and at the end was what looked like an enormous cannon.
What's that?
asked Lister.
It's the ship's drive,
Crichton replied.
It's the duality jump.
What's a duality jump?
Don't be thick, Lister. Everyone knows what a duality jump is, said Rimmer, lying.
Crichton scurried through the pear-shaped exit, and Lister practically had to sprint out of the engine room to catch up with them 2 corridors later. Suddenly the cat swiveled as they passed a full-length mirror recessed back in the wall. His heart pounded, his pulse quickened. He felt silly and giddy. He was in love.
Yo, work of art, baby,
He crooned softly at his reflection. Lister turned and shouted,
Come on! I can't. You're gonna have to help me.
Lister picked up his golden-booted foot and started to yank him down the corridor. Unable to help himself, the cat hung onto the mirror. His gloved fingers squeaked across the glass surface as Lister pulled him free.
Thanks, man,
The cat said gratefully.
That was a bad one.
Oh, I'm so excited,
said Crichton, shuffling along and absently dusting a completely clean fire extinguisher.
We all are. The girls can hardly stop themselves from jumping up and down.
Ha 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 ha!
Brayed Rimmer falsely.
Charmita, Charmita!
Ah,
Said Crichton.
Vi paralos espicanton, Capitano Rimmer.
I'm sorry?
Vi paralos espicanton, Capitano Rimmer.
Come again?
You speak Esperanto, Captain Rimmer.
Oh, oui, jawohl, si.
Rimmer searched desperately through his memory for the appropriate phrase. Mercifully it came to him.
Bon volo, alcendi la podiston, lausane estas rano en mia bideo.
A frog?
Said Crichton.
In which bidet?
Ha 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 ha!
Brayed Rimmer even less convincingly.
It doesn't matter, I'll deal with it myself.
Crichton walked round the corner and down the ramp onto the service deck.
Well, here they are,
He said. Without looking where Crichton was beckoning, Rimmer bent down on one knee and swept his cap in a smooth arc.
Charmita!
He purred. Lister and the cat tumbled in behind him. Their eyes met the hollow sockets of the 3 grinning skeletons sitting around the table. There was a very, very long silence. It was followed by another very, very long silence.
Well,
Said Crichton, a little upset.
isn't anybody going to say hello?
Hi, said Lister weakly. I'm Dave. This is the cat, and this here is Ace. Rimmer still hadn't closed his mouth from forming the final vowel of Charmita. Lister leaned over and whispered to him, conspiratorially. I think that little blonde one's given you the eye cap.
Now,
Crichton clapped his hands.
you all get to know one another, and I'll run off and fetch some tea.
He staggered off up the slope.
I don't believe this,
Said Rimmer, massaging the H on his forehead. Lister looked at him.
Be strong, big man. Our one contact with intelligent life in over 3 million years, and he turns out to be the android version of Norman Bates. So, they're a little on the skinny side,
Said the cat, ever hopeful.
A few had dinners, and who knows?
Lister walked up to the table and put his arms around 2 of the skeleton's shoulders.
I know this may not be the time or the place to say this, girls, but my mate Ace here is incredibly brave. Smeg off, dog food face. And he's got just tons and tons of girlfriends. I'm warning you, Lister.
Crichton raced back down the slope, carrying a tray which held several plates of triangular-shaped sandwiches, a pot of steaming tea, and a plate with 7 of his precious chocolates on it. As he laid out the cups on the table, he looked up, suddenly aware of the lack of conversation.
Is there something wrong?
He asked.
Something wrong?
Said Rimmer, aghast.
They're dead.
Who's dead?
Asked Crichton, pouring some milk into the cups.
They're dead.
Rimmer waved at the 3 skeletons.
They're all dead.
My God!
Crichton stepped back in horror.
I was only away 2 minutes.
They've been dead for centuries.
No.
Yes.
Are you a doctor?
You only have to look at them.
Rimmer whined.
They've got less meat on them than a chicken nugget.
Well, what am I going to do?
Crichton stammered.
I'm programmed to serve them.
Well, the first thing we should do is, bury them, said Lister quietly.
You're that sure they're dead?
Yes!
Rimmer shouted. Crichton waddled over to Richard's leering skeleton.
What about this one?
Rimmer sighed.
Look, there's a very simple test.
He walked up to the head of the table.
All right, he said. Hands up any of you who are alive.
Crichton looked on anxiously. To his dismay, there was no response. He made frantic signals, coaxing the girls to raise their hands.
Okay,
said Rimmer finally. Crichton's shoulders buckled, and he dropped limply into a chair, totally defeated.
I thought they might be... Oh, but I wouldn't allow myself. I didn't want to admit... I'm programmed to serve them. It's all I can do. I let them down so badly.
Lister shuffled uncomfortably.
What am I to do?
Crichton said plaintively. A buzzer went off in Crichton's head. It was his internal alarm clock telling him it was time for Miss Yvette's bath. Automatically, he raised himself, and then remembering, sank back down again. He took a sonic screwdriver from his top pocket, flipped a series of release catches on his neck, removed his head, and plonked it unceremoniously down onto the table.
What are you doing?
Said the cat.
I'm programmed to serve, said Crichton's head. They're dead. The program is finished. I'm activating my shutdown disk.
Whoa, said Lister. Slow down. Crichton's hands twisted the right ear off his disembodied head and pressed a latch which flipped open his skull. Crichton, listen to me. Crichton started removing the minute circuit boards from inside his brain and stacking them neatly on the table. Crichton! He tugged out several batches of interface leads, neatly wrapped them up, and placed them tidily beside the rest of his mind. Finally, he located his shutdown program.
Sorry about the mess,
he said, and switched himself off. His eyes rotated back into the plastic of his skull, and his body slumped forward in his seat and crashed onto the floor.
It's driving me batty. Must you do it here?
Rimmer surveyed the array of android organs spread higgledy-piggledy all over the sleeping quarters.
What's this on my pillow? It's his eyes.
I'm trying to fix him, said Lister, holding Crichton's nose in one hand and poking a pipe cleaner soaked in white spirit up his nostril with the other. It had taken them a week to transport the two broken halves of the Nova 5 back to Red Dwarf. They had needed all 6 of the remaining transport craft, operating on autopilot, to wrench the ship free of the centuries-old methane ice. But after 5 days of maximum thrust, the small transporters had finally yanked the wreck clear and hauled it slowly and precariously up to the orbiting Red Dwarf. The drive section of the Nova 5 held few surprises. Crichton had meticulously updated the inventory every Tuesday evening for 2 million years. Most of the food was still vacuum stored. Lister had been delighted to discover they had 25,000 spicy poppadoms and 130 tons of mango chutney. Enough, he pointed out at the time, to keep him happy for the best part of a month. There was, thankfully, nearly 2,000 gallons of irradiated cow's milk, and Lister had insisted the dog's milk be flushed out into the vacuum of space, where it had instantly frozen, leaving a huge dog milk asteroid for some future species to ponder over.
Why'd you have to keep his bits all over my bunk?
So I know where they are.
Yes, well, I'm sorry, but I refuse to have somebody else's eyes on my pillow.
Look, I'll have him finished by this afternoon.
You've been saying that for 2 months. What's this in my coffee mug? It's a big toe.
Rimmer, will you just smeg off and leave me to it?
What the smeg do you want to repair him for anyway? He's just a mechanoid. A mechanoid that's gone completely barking mad.
I want to find out about the duality drive. I want to know if we can fix it. And, I don't know, I feel sorry for him.
Sorry for him? He's a machine. It's like feeling sorry for a tractor.
It's not. He's got a personality.
Yes, a personality that should be severely sedated, bound in a metal straitjacket, and locked in a rubber room with a stick between his teeth.
I think I can fix that.
You think it's just like repairing your bike, don't you? Spot of grease, clean all his bits, rebore his carburetor, and bang, he's as good as new.
Same principle.
He's got a defect in his artificial intelligence. You need a degree in advanced mental engineering from Caltech to set him to rights.
Lister prodded one of Crichton's circuit boards with a soldering iron. The noseless head fizzed momentarily into life.
"Aha!" it said in rapid falsetto. "Elephant Rain, Dingbat, Vietnam."
The eyes on Rimmer's pillow rotated and blinked.
"Telephone sandwich, kerplunk, armadillo, rumpelstiltskin, purple."
Well, said Rimmer.
Once again, you've proved me wrong.
Rimmer looked at his bunkside clock. 2:34 a.m. Rimmer clambered down from his bunk and looked over at Lister's sleeping body. He was still holding one of Crichton's circuit boards in one hand and a sonic screwdriver in the other.
And I'm supposed to keep you sane? He thought. Who the smeg is supposed to keep me sane?
Rimmer closed his eyes and tried to sleep. It was useless. He got Holly to simulate his red, black, white, blue, yellow, and orange striped skiing anorak, and decided to check out the salvage operation in the shuttle bay. Rimmer voice-activated the huge corrugated lead doors of Bay 17, which yawned open to reveal the two halves of the wreck of the Nova 5. Even though it was the early hours of the morning, the massive salvage operation was in full flow. Rimmer looked down from the gantry at the battalions of scutters who were still unloading supplies from the mainly undamaged front section. Another group of scutters, wielding laser torches, were still trying to cut their way through the hull of the rear section. Even with the most powerful bazookoid lasers, their progress had been slow. Barely 2 centimeters a day through the meter-thick strontium-agol alloy. But what really interested Rimmer was the second half of the Nova 5. He'd gone through some of the ship's computer files and had every good reason to suspect that the dead segment contained something that might very well change his life. He stood on the gantry, hands in his ski anorak pockets, watching the scutters lasering their way through the hull.
"How long before we're in?"
he asked Holly.
2, maybe 3 days.
There was a noise, the sound of creaking metal buckling and ripping as the huge arch-shaped door, which the laser torches were cutting into the craft's hide, slowly teetered forwards and fell like a medieval drawbridge, crushing all 8 scutters.
Maybe even sooner,
added Holly unconvincingly. Rimmer raced down the gantry steps and across the steel floor of the hangar to the newly burned entrance in the stern section of the hulk of the Nova 5. He peered into the dusty gloom. Floor lights glowed dimly down the length of the corridor. He summoned 2 scutters away from their unloading duties and, sending them ahead, stepped inside. The corridor was still warm from the laser torches. Electric cables and dismembered circuitry hung down from the ceiling like dead tubers in a petrified forest. Rimmer inched his way along the corridor as the scutter's headlights cut swathes through the murky silence. Most of the doors were open, or hanging off their hinges. There was a sensation, a feeling he couldn't explain, that the ship wasn't dead, that there was something there, something alive. Slowly he worked his way around the tortured topography of the first deck, then clambered down the broken spiral staircase, and found himself on the stasis corridor. Most of the booths had been scooped clean by the scalpel-sharp corner of the glacier in the crash. 3 remained. 2 of them were punctured, and inside, The once human occupants had been fossilized into the walls by centuries upon centuries of patient ice. The third was occupied. Skeletal legs jutted through a gash in the stasis booth door as the impact of the crash had driven the incumbent's limbs through the reinforced glass. Rimmer peered in through what remained of the observation window. Somehow the rest of the body had been preserved, wedged half in and half out of the stasis booth. The legs had withered with age, while the upper body remained in suspended animation. Timeless, unaging, unharmed. Rimmer voice-activated the door. Surely he couldn't be alive. The door lock twirled, and the door arced open. The man opened his eyes and looked down at his legs. His scream cut through Rimmer like a shard of jagged glass. Then he stopped screaming and died of shock. Rimmer's heart went on a cross-country run around his body. It bounced off his stomach, caroomed into his ribcage, and tried to make a forced exit through his windpipe. It was still hammering around his chest cavity like a deranged pinball when he finally stopped running, 4 decks up. He fell into a twilit recreation room and was on his haunches, still trying to suck air into his reluctant lungs, when he turned and saw the figure standing by the fruit machine. His brain uttered a silent expletive, and his heart put on its spiked shoes and went for another lap. The figure turned to face him. The hologrammatic H on her forehead glinted fluorescently in the blue light of the games room.
Ah, there you are, she smiled. Where's Yvette? I've been waiting for ages.
Yvette who?
I need those course calculations.
She walked 6 paces towards him and held out her hand.
Thank you,
she said, and disappeared. Suddenly she reappeared back at the fruit machine with her back to him.
Are you okay?
Said Rimmer, getting to his feet. She turned.
Ah, there you are.
She smiled.
Where's Yvette? I've been waiting for ages. I need those course calculations.
Yet again, she stepped towards him, held out her hand, and vanished, reappearing once more at the other side of the room.
Ah, there you are.
She smiled again, and Rimmer left.
Quark Dingbat Physiogog Netherlands,
said Crichton's disembodied head.
Smirk Window Clean Double Helix Badger.
Then there was a fzzz of a circuit shorting, and his eyes blinked closed. A thin wisp of smoke curled up from his open skull. Lister cursed. He peeked into Crichton's mechanoid brain, tutted, and fished out a half-eaten 3-day-old cheese sandwich with chili dressing. He prodded around with his soldering iron, absently biting into the sandwich. The cat walked in with his lunch on a tray and sat down at the table.
If you try and take this food, you're in serious personal danger.
I'm not going to try and take it.
Just don't even think about it.
The cat pulled an embroidered lace lobster bib out of his top pocket and tied it around his neck. From his inside pocket he produced a solid silver case lined with velvet which contained an exquisite set of gold cutlery with hand-carved mother-of-pearl handles, which he placed either side of his plate. He rubbed his hands together and went into his food-taunting eating ritual.
I'm gonna eat your little chickie,
he chanted at the chicken Marengo.
I'm gonna eat your little chickie. I'm gonna eat your little chickie, 'cause I like eating chicks.
The song finished. He looked away from the food like a baseball pitcher checking the bases, then suddenly flicked the chicken off the plate, and in the same smooth movement, caught it in mid-air with the same hand and put it back on the plate.
Too slow, chicken Marengo,
he chided.
Too slow for this cat.
Why don't you just eat it?
It's no fun if you don't give it a chance.
But it's dead. It's cooked.
Whoa!
The cat slapped his hand down on the plate, sending the chicken spinning into the air and over his shoulder. He kicked away from the chair, somersaulted backwards, and caught it in his mouth before it hit the ground.
Hey, this chicken is faster than I thought.
He put the chicken back on the plate, and had just started to juggle the potatoes when Rimmer walked in.
Gentlemen,
he beamed broadly.
There's someone I'd like you to meet. Someone who's a deep personal friend of mine. Someone who I'm sure will enrich all our lives. Someone, I've decided, who will be a more interesting and stimulating bunkmate for myself, which is why I intend to move in with this someone to the spare sleeping quarters next door. Gentlemen?"
Rimmer gestured like a medieval courtesan, and into the open door frame stepped someone Lister and the cat recognized instantly. There in the hatchway, standing beside Arnold J. Rimmer, was another, completely identical Arnold J. Rimmer. After Rimmer left the woman by the fruit machine, he rounded up the Scutters, and they made their way down the broken stairwell to the Nova 5's hologram simulation suite. Her personality disk, scarred and warped, span round and round in the drive, aimlessly projecting her through the same piece of dialogue for the zillionth time in pointless perpetual motion. The woman's name had been Nancy O'Keefe. A flight engineer, second class, she'd been the highest-ranking casualty in the ship's rear section. What remained of the computer's intelligence had automatically recreated her, even though her database was corrupted beyond repair in the accident. Rimmer told the Scutter to eject the disk and started searching through the rest of the Nova 5's personality library. One by one, he went through the 8-woman, 2-man crew. One by one, the Scutter's clumsy claws placed each of the disks in the drive and booted them up. And one by one, all 10 members of the Nova 5 were resurrected before him. Each in some way was corrupted. All 10 disks were unplayable. The frustration of it! For 2 cruel hours, while he went through each of the disks, he'd been able to entertain the prospect that, at last, he could acquire a companion. A hologrammatic companion who could understand how it felt to be dead, how it felt to be a hologram, how it felt. Someone who could touch him. Yes, holograms could touch. Someone he could touch. To touch again, to be touched. But no. Denied. All 10 disks warped, scratched, ruined. All 10 disks destroyed in the crash. Rimmer sat down and tried to think. What if he could copy his own disk from the Red Dwarf hologram library and then use the Nova 5's disk drive to simulate a duplicate him? 2 Arnold Rimmers. 2 hims. Who better as a companion than his own self? Arnold J. Rimmer 1 and Arnold J. Rimmer 2. Brill smegging illiant. How to be a winner? An introduction to panoramics.
Ours,
said the 2 Rimmers simultaneously. Lister tossed the book onto the computer trolley with the rest of the Rimmers' belongings and picked another off the shelf. Cooking with chilies, he read.
Yours,
the Rimmers chanted in unison. Lister tossed it back on the shelf, then turned and opened the locker marked Rimmer AJ, BSc, SSC, and started to heap all the contents onto the trolley. 20 pairs of identical military blue underpants, all on coat hangers in protective cellophane wrapping, the pyjamas with the dry cleaning tags pinned to the collars, the piles of survivalist weaponry magazines, and his 1 CD, Billy Benton and his choir sing the rock and roll greats.
What about these posters?
Asked the duplicate Rimmer. They're mine, said Lister.
I know they're yours, but the blue tack isn't.
You want to take the blue tack?
Well, it is mine,
pointed out the original.
I did pay for it, with my money.
I think there's one of your old fingernail clippings under the bunk. I'll put that in too, shall I? Rimmer Mark II eyed him narrowly.
Don't try and be amusing, Lister. It doesn't suit you.
For no reason that Lister could see, both Rimmers howled with laughter at this last remark, bending at the waist and thumping their knees.
Great put down, Arnie,
said the original Rimmer through a mask of tears. Lister looked on, bemused. The duplicate stood up, still giggling.
I'll go and check how the Scutters are coping with the redecoration plans. See you, big man,
said the copy, stepping out of the hatchway.
Catch you later, Ace,
said Rimmer with a look of total infatuation. You're a very, very weird person, said Lister, dropping a wedge of neatly ironed black socks onto the trolley. In fact, both of you are. Rimmer was oblivious to criticism.
What an idea! What a genius idea! Using the Nova 5's hologram unit to generate a duplicate me. That's the best smegging day's work I ever did.
Of all the people you could have brought back, anyone in the Red Dwarf crew, you'd decide to copy your own disc and bring back another you. That's turning narcissism into a science.
I wanted a companion. Who more interesting and stimulating than myself?
Why didn't you bring back one of the girls?
Because all of the girls thought I was a prat.
Well, one of the guys, then?
They all thought I was a prat, too. Everybody thought I was a prat except for me, which is why I brought back the Duke. Old Iron Balls himself.
Bonehead, too? How could there be only one?
I don't have to take this any more, Rimmer sighed happily. I don't have to take the put-downs, the smart-aleck quips, the oh-so-clever snidey asides. It's the dawn of a new era for me, Listy. No more you with your stupid, annoying habits. No more you holding me back, dragging me down.
Me? How did I drag you down?
Oh, let me count the ways.
What ways?
Humming.
Humming?
You hummed persistently and maliciously for 8 months, every time I sat down to do some revision.
So, you're saying you never became an officer because you shared your quarters with someone who hummed occasionally?
Not occasionally, constantly.
You failed your astronavigation exam 8 times before we even met.
There you go again, always ready for the smart-aleck quip.
That's not a quip, it's a fact.
There you go again, putting me down.
So, what else did I do besides hum?
Everything. Everything you ever did was calculated to hold me back, put me down and annoy me.
Like what?
Exchanging all the symbols on my revision timetable, so that instead of taking my engineering finals, I went swimming.
They fell off. I thought I put them all back in the right place.
Swapping my toothpaste for a tube of contraceptive jelly? That was a joke. Yes, the same kind of joke as putting my name on the waiting list for experimental pile surgery. The point is, you've always stopped me from being successful. That is a scientific fact.
Rimmer, you can't blame me for your lousy life.
Not just you. It's been all my bunkmates. Pemberton, Ledbetter, Daly, all of you.
It's always the same. It's never you, is it? It's always someone or something else. You never had the right set of pens for G&D drawing. Your dividers don't stretch far enough.
Well, they don't, protested Rimmer.
In the end, you can't turn round and say, sorry I buggered up me life, it was Lister's fault.
It's too late, my life's already been buggered up. It's my death that concerns me now, and I have no intention of buggering that up.
Rimmer turned on his heels.
Because I'm getting out of here and moving in with myself.
Blackness. Nothingness. Then a sound. Then the sound again. What did the sound mean? The sound again, but this time it was different. He recognized the sound. He remembered hearing it before. It was language, but he'd forgotten what it meant. A name he should have known. His name. Crichton? Crichton? A flash of green light. Then black lines drew themselves across his field of vision. Then the lines melted away, and he was looking at a message. Mechanoid Visual System version 1X.05. Copyright Informax Data Corporation 2296. And then sight. Floods of brilliant colours, blues, reds, yellows, dancing nonsensically before him. He focused. There was a man's face grinning at him.
Yes,
said the face.
Brutal!
Said Crichton. Lister twiddled about inside his head with a sonic screwdriver.
Hello, Mr. David,
said Crichton.
Yes,
said Lister again.
I've done it. You're back in action.
He put Crichton's skull piece back into place, fastened the latches, and replaced his ear.
How'd you feel?
Everything seems to be functioning,
said Crichton flatly.
Listen,
said Lister, leaning over him.
there's something I need to know. What's the duality jump? What is it? What does it do?
A plastic frown rippled across Crichton's brow.
It powers the ship. It's a quantum drive. It allows you to leap from one point in space to another. Why?
How does it work?
I'm just a mechanoid. I don't know these things.
How does it work, Crichton?
Lister insisted.
Oh, it's something to do with quantum mechanics and indeterminism. Something about when you measure electrons, they can be in two places at the same time.
Crichton seemed strangely reluctant to talk about it, and kept stressing it was a human matter, and not really the kind of thing mechanoids should concern themselves with. But bit by bit, Lister wheedled what he could out of Crichton, and doggedly pieced together what he needed to know. When you made a duality jump, it seemed, you temporarily coexisted at 2 points in the universe. Then you chose one of these points to be in. In this way, you could leapfrog across the universe, not bound by the limits of space-time.
So, how long,
Lister pressed,
would it take a duality jump to get back to Earth?
Oh, a long time.
How long?
You'd have to make about 1,000 jumps.
How long?
2, Crichton mused, perhaps even 3 months.
3 months?
Lister was already into the touch-up shuffle.
But there's no fuel. It decayed centuries ago.
What kind of fuel does it need?
I don't know. I'm just a mechanoid.
Crichton, please.
Crichton shifted on the bench and twisted his fingers uncomfortably.
I'm just a mechanoid. I just clean things.
But you know, don't you?
Only because I heard Miss Yvette talk about it once. But I'm not supposed to know.
What is it?
Uranium-233, whatever that is.
Yes!
Lister thumped the table.
Nice one, Crichton.
Well, if that's all, Mr. David,
Crichton smiled his lipless smile.
I'd like to be shut down again now, please.
What are you talking about? It took me 4 months to fix you.
But there's no point in my being online. I was programmed to serve the crew of the Nova 5. They're dead now, therefore my program is completed.
So, you've got to start a new program.
Crichton tilted his head and arched a hairless eyebrow.
To serve whom?
To save no one. To serve yourself.
But I have to serve someone. I was created to serve. I serve, therefore I am.
Lister forced back his fur-lined leather deerstalker with the heels of his palms in exasperation.
Crichton, chill out, okay? Loosen up. Relax. Just hang, will you? Chill the smeg out.
Why?
Because I say so.
Crichton's face seemed to brighten.
Is that an order?
He said hopefully.
Why?
Well, if it's an order, that's different.
It is an order.
Lister smiled.
Chill out.
Crichton was perched stiffly on a tall bar stool in the Copacabana Hawaiian cocktail bar, staring at the dry martini cocktail, stirred 2 olives, standing before him. He didn't really like dry martinis, shaken or otherwise, but he'd ordered it because it was the drink Hudson always had when he went to the High Life Club in Androids, and to Crichton it was the zenith of sophistication. He knocked back the martini in a single gulp, paused a few seconds, then regurgitated it back into his glass and stirred it round for a while with his cocktail stick. He wasn't very good at enjoying himself, he decided. He'd much rather have been cleaning something. He would much rather have been re-varnishing the dance floor or shampooing all 2,572 crushed velvet seats. Still, Mr. David had ordered him to
chill out,
to hang. So, hang was what he must do. He sank the cocktail once more and brought it back up again. He flicked through his vocabulary database for a definition of hang, verb slang in brackets.
Reduce tension.
He read once again.
Lose rigidity. Cease working, worrying, etc. Allow muscles to become limp. Relax. enjoy oneself.
Crichton relaxed his muscles. His head lolled back, his arms hung loosely by his sides, and he fell off the bar stool onto the purple carpet. He climbed back onto the stool and started to worry that he hadn't ceased worrying. He looked around at the flashing disco lights on the empty dance floor. He became aware for the first time that music was pumping out of the speakers. If he was really to carry out Mr. David's orders to the letter, he supposed he was obliged to get down and dance. With a sigh of resignation, he took his martini cocktail and waddled over to the dance floor. The only dance he knew was the tap dance to Yankee Doodle Dandy. The music playing was Hugo Lovepole's sexy ballad, Hey Baby, Don't Be Ovulatin' Tonight. Crichton set his drink on the floor, stamped his right foot until he got in time with the smoochy beat, and began tap dancing furiously. And that was how the two Rimmers found him as they strolled through the recreation decks, taking their early evening constitutional. It had been a very pleasant stroll, quite the nicest evening Rimmer had spent for years. His duplicate was a total delight. They had each other in tucks, reminiscing, talking over old glories, old girlfriends, the simple manly joy of chewing the fat with a like-minded, right-thinking colleague. At last he had someone with whom he could share ideas he'd always been too embarrassed to propound before, such as his French dictation theory of life. Rimmer believed there were two kinds of people. The first kind were history essay people, who started life with a blank sheet, with no score, and accumulated points with every success they achieved. The other kind were the French dictation people. They started off with 100%, and every mistake they made was deducted from their original perfect score. Rimmer always felt his parents had forced him firmly into the second group. Everything he'd ever done was somehow imperfect and flawed, a disappointment. Years before, when he'd been promoted to second technician, he felt he hadn't succeeded in becoming a second technician, rather he'd failed to become a first technician. While he expounded the theory, his double nodded in agreement and murmured encouragements such as "absolutely" and "very true." Right now, though, the conversation had shifted, and Rimmer was listening with mounting glee as his double reminded him of their one-night stand with Yvonne Magruder.
What a body! What a body! The double was chuckling. And hers wasn't bad either.
Rimmer guffawed. They paused. As across the disco floor, they caught sight of Crichton, clickety-clacking frenetically.
What on Io do you think you're doing?
The double said, bemused.
I'm chilling out, sirs,
said Crichton.
I'm hanging.
Click, 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 tap, tippy-tap, tip.
You're what?
Said Rimmer.
I'm getting mellow.
Clicky-clack, tip-tip.
I'm coasting. I'm chilling out.
Crichton suddenly felt ridiculous and stopped.
How long have you been fixed?
Rimmer asked. Crichton was wondering why there were two identical-looking Rimmers addressing him, but he felt that, as a mechanoid, it would have been impertinent to ask.
Since 12:15 hours, sirs.
It's 7:30 in the evening. Have you been messing about all that time?
Said the double.
I was carrying out Mr. David's orders, Mr. Arnold, sir. He ordered me to relax.
Oh, I suppose you do everything you're ordered to.
Yes, sir, I do, sir.
Really?
The two Rimmers hiked eyebrows at each other.
Yes, I'm programmed to serve, sirs.
The double pointed to Crichton's drink.
Eat that cocktail glass.
Right away, sir,
said Crichton, and ate the glass.
So,
Rimmer mused.
If I said to you, spring clean the entire sleeping quarters deck, I suppose you'd do that too, would you?
Of course, Mr. Arnold's.
Splendid,
said Rimmer.
Splendissimo,
said his digital doppelganger. The lift doors split open and disgorged a tired but happy Lister onto the habitation deck corridor. He'd spent the last 2 days and a night down in the technical library, then another morning liaising with Holly in the geology lab. In the last 56 hours, he'd learnt many things. He'd started off thinking structure and composition of planet crust and rock formations was incredibly boring, but now he was absolutely certain of it. Still, he now knew more about uranium production and mining techniques than he knew about the London Jets Mega Bowl winning team of 75, and he knew what the entire London Jets Mega Bowl winning team of 75 had for breakfast on the day of the game. This was the way it went. Fissile uranium-233 could be synthesized from the non-fissile thorium isotope thorium-232. And this was the best part. Thorium-232 wasn't even rare. It was abundant in the universe. It abounded. There was lots of it. And this was confirmed when his radiometric spectrographic survey turned up 7 likely moons in this solar system alone. 5 of them would have required underground mining, so he had to rule them out. Of the remaining 2, 1, the more likely one, was 7 months' travel away. But on the nearer moon, less than 5 days' journey away, there was an 87% probability that the ore deposits he needed were lying close to the surface. No shafts, no pit props, no radon gas ventilation problems. Maybe he could do it. Red Dwarf was a mining ship. It had all the equipment, the earth-moving vehicles, the processing plants, the whole enchilada. When he turned into his sleeping quarters, it took several moments before his tired brain registered what it was that was different. At first, he assumed he must have got out of the lift on the wrong floor, and he was now standing on the wrong deck. Then he saw his goldfish, only the water was clean, and you could see the plastic Vatican quite clearly. He looked around. The dull grey metal walls had vanished behind a Victorian floral print in various pretty pinks. The bedspreads were in delicate cream lace. Festoon blinds in a mixture of rosebud patterns hung over the viewport window. A salmon-tinted Aubusson rug swept from under the bunks to the new porcelain pedestal wash-basin. The lounge area was curtained off from the bunks by red silk drapes with gold tiebacks. The table in the middle of the room was covered in a briar rose, short-skirted circular cloth, on top of which stood rows of newly polished boots and piles of neat, crisply folded laundry. It was appalling. It was an atrocity against machismo.
What the smeg is going on?
Crichton looked up from his ironing.
Good afternoon, Mr. David, sir.
What have you done?
A spot of tidying.
What are these?
Lister snatched an unrecognizable item from the pile of laundry.
Your boxer shorts, Mr. David.
No way are these my boxer shorts,
said Lister.
They bend. What have you done to this place? What is this? This bowl of scented pencil shavings?
Potpourri, sir.
Pot-poo? Where is everything? Where's me orange peel with the cig dimps in it? Where's the remnants of last Wednesday's curry? I hadn't finished eating it. Where's me coffee mug with the mould in it?
I threw it away, sir. I threw it all away.
You what? I was breeding that mould. It was called Albert. I was trying to get him 2 feet high.
Why, sir?
Because it drove Rimmer nuts, and driving Rimmer nuts is what keeps me going. What did you do it for?
The 2 Mr. Rimmers ordered me to, sir. They even recommended the decor. They said it was very you.
Lister sat down on the apple-green, chintz-covered chaise longue next to the potted plastic wisteria and wondered where he could begin. There was something about Crichton that really disturbed him, but he wasn't quite sure what. He was a slave, and Lister hated that. For some reason, mankind seemed to be obsessed with enslaving someone. Black slavery, class slavery, housewife slavery, and now mechanoid slavery. Then it hit him. It wasn't so much slavery that got to him, though get to him it did. It was the happy slave. It was the acquiescence, the assent to serve, the willingness to be a slave.
What about you?
Lister looked up as Crichton ploughed through the ironing.
Don't you ever want to do something just for yourself?
Myself?
Crichton sniggered.
That's a bit of a barmy notion, if you don't mind me saying so, sir.
Isn't there anything you look forward to?
Crichton stood, the steaming iron in his hand for a full minute, trying to think of an answer.
androids, he said at last. I look forward to androids.
Besides androids? Crichton had another think.
Getting a new squidgy mop?
He ventured. Besides dumb soap operas and even dumber cleaning utensils? Crichton fell silent. What do you think of thorium mining? Crichton looked baffled. Follow me. They found the cat on corridor Omega 577, sleeping peacefully on top of a narrow metal locker, a hairnet protecting his pompadour. Hey, cat, wake up. Lister rocked the locker. The cat opened one eye.
This better be good. I was sleeping, and sleeping is my third favorite thing.
Come on, follow me. A yawn split the cat's face and made his head appear to double in size. He sprang down from the locker, arched his spine, and stretched until the back of his head was touching the heels of his gold-braided sleeping slippers, and yawned again. He opened the locker door, reached inside, and draped an imitation king penguin fur smoking jacket casually over his shoulders, before popping the top off a magnum of milk and filling a crystal goblet. He gargled petitely, urinated in the locker, and followed Lister and Crichton down the corridor.
Where are we going?
Mining. The two rimmers, dressed in identical PE kits, jumped up in the air, flapping their arms simultaneously in time to the music, yelling encouragement at each other.
Come on! Keep it up! You too!
They landed, crouched like bullfrogs, and leapt up into the air again.
Jump! Stretch! Jump! Stretch! Jump! Stretch!
The rimmers were alone aboard Red Dwarf. Lister, Crichton, the cat, and 12 scutters had gone off in Blue Midget, loaded with surface mining equipment, in search of the uranium deposits on the Black Desert moon below. The two rimmers were to stay behind to supervise the welding together of the two halves of the Nova 5 by the 84 remaining scutters. They were to oversee the restoration of the ship, to render it space-worthy again. They were in charge. In charge of a major operation, a gargantuan engineering challenge, and they were in charge. Holly had estimated the operation would take 2 months to complete, at the very least. Well, the two rimmers would see about that. They would do it in half that time, they decided. No, a quarter of that time. Under the excellent management of 2 Arnold Jays, those scutters were going to work their little claws off. That ship would be ready in a fortnight. It would be ready, new and gleaming by the time Lister returned with his uranium haul. Imagine his stupid little porky face, hardly able to conceal his grudging admiration. "I've got to admit it," he would say. "You guys really are a great team." In the meantime, they were getting fit, getting in shape, getting prepared for the ordeal ahead. This was day 1 of the new regime.
Jump! Stretch! Jump! Stretch! And rest!
The original rimmer collapsed on the floor.
No! Keep jumping!
The double yelled, finding new strength from his other self's weakness. Red-faced rimmer started up again.
You're right!
He shouted.
Keep going! Through the pain barrier! Jump! Stretch! Jump! Stretch! And rest!
Said Rimmer again.
What are you doing, man?
Screamed his copy, still leaping.
I'm resting! It's going all grey! That's the pain barrier! Beat it! Absolutely!
He started jumping again.
Up, up, up! More, more, more! Jump, jump, jump! Stretch, stretch, stretch! Rest, rest, rest!
Pleaded Rimmer.
No, no, no!
Insisted the double. They continued leaping up and down for a further minute, both too breathless to speak.
And rest!
Whispered the double finally. Rimmer landed on the floor, and his legs sagged beneath him. He staggered backwards towards the bunk and fell forwards onto his knees. The glands at the back of his throat were producing saliva by the bucket load.
Great sesh,
he gurgled.
That little bit extra. That's what it's all about. Driving through the pain barrier to the brink of unconsciousness. Great sesh. You owe me 7,
said the double on all fours, wheezing like an 80-year-old bronchial bagpipe player.
What?
Panted Rimmer, his face quite yellow.
I did 7 extra jerks while you were resting. Come on. We're not down to counting jerks, are we? What's a couple of jerks between duplicates? It's for your own good. I'm 7 jerks fitter than you. We can't have that, can we? I'll do them first thing in the morning while you're asleep. Now!
Rasped the double. Rimmer hauled himself onto his wobbly white legs and started to leap up in the air again.
1,
he counted.
2,
He counted.
3. That wasn't a full one. Call it half. 3.5.
He counted. And that wasn't a full one either. Call it 3.
4.
Rimmer leapt a full 6 inches off the floor.
3 1/8.
The double corrected.
4 1/8.
3.5 was the verdict. Finally, after 25 leaps, Rimmer's duplicate agreed he'd done 7.
You see,
said the double.
It's about teamwork. I drive and encourage you. And I drive and encourage you,
gasped Rimmer, and then he was sick.
Right.
The double rubbed his hands.
What time should we get up? That's a good question, IB. Early, very early. 8:30? What? And miss half the day? How about 7?
The double ventured.
How about 6?
Rimmer topped him.
No, 4:30. 4:30? That's the middle of the night. We want to be ready in a fortnight, don't we? Yes, but 4:30?
Rimmer moaned.
That's ridiculous. Why is it ridiculous? You think Napoleon, on the eve of the Battle of Borodino, said, "Wake me tomorrow at 9 with 2 runny eggs and some toasty soldiers"? You're absolutely right, Duke.
Rimmer voice-activated the digital alarm clock and climbed thankfully onto his new bunk.
What are you doing?
The double looked at him askance.
I'm going to bed, Ace. It's only 2 in the morning. We need to read up on welding techniques. But we're getting up in a minute,
Rimmer said in a small, pathetic voice.
You take metallurgy and thyroton and heat control systems, and I'll take magnesium arc welding and chemical bonding techniques.
Then we'll test one another, and whoever does worst has to do another 100 jumps before bunk down.
Once again, Arn, I hate to say it, but you're absolutely right.
The 2 Rimmers finally got to bed at 3:37 a.m. and got up again 53 minutes later to start their morning exercises.